to the weekly World Climate Change News. This is Reem Tamer from Egypt, and here are today's headlines. World's glaciers melt faster than before. Climate change is altering Earth's axis. Cutting methane is crucial to meet climate goals. Climate change is causing a humanitarian crisis. Climate commitment declared insufficient. Shipping industry calls for new global carbon tax. UK is to speed up target to cut carbon emissions. World's glaciers melt faster than before. So, according to a study led by a team of French researchers, world's glaciers are melting at a much faster rate now than they were earlier. Total ice loss is growing by approximately 48 GT year per decade. The ice streams on the planet are estimated to have lost 270 billion tons of ice per year in the last 2 decades. 1/5 of the global sea level rise could be attributed to the meltwater thus produced. Ice loss in all glaciers studied have a direct link to climate change. Climate change is altering Earth's axis. According to scientists, climate change is causing the locations of Earth's north and south poles to change more than ever in a phenomenon called the polar wander or the polar drift. It's understood that the way water is distributed on the surface of the Earth impacts the polar drift. As for researchers, they speculate that the redistributed waters from melting glaciers could have caused the polar drift eastwards. Cutting methane is crucial to meet climate goals. According to a new UN report, countries need to drastically reduce their methane emissions in order to adhere to the temperature rise limits set by the Paris Agreement. Methane is a much more potent GHG than CO2, and cutting methane could result in favorable climate impacts sooner. It's also found that 35% of anthropogenic methane emissions is caused by fossil fuels. The fossil fuel sector, which has the biggest potential to cut methane emissions, could help tackle climate change. Climate change is causing a humanitarian crisis. Climate change is causing rapid retreat of glaciers that store 70% of the world's fresh water. This could pose a huge humanitarian crisis for people, especially in the developing countries who depend on glaciers for potable water. Also, even under the optimistic target of 1.5 C increase in global temperature, 1/3 of Himalayan ice would be lost, and with higher temperature rise, 2/3 of the said ice would be lost, and also adversely impacting the lives of almost 250 million people. Climate commitment declared insufficient. Germany's highest court has ruled that the country's current climate laws are not enough and passed the burden of emission reductions to the nation's young, thus violating their fundamental freedom. The country had committed to reducing CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030 to fight climate change. The ruling has put pressure on the government to revise the laws by the end of the next year. The court has ruled that the emission reductions needed after 2030 needs to be achieved sooner and at short notice. Shipping industry calls for new global carbon tax. The global shipping industry is calling on the world's governments to tax its carbon emissions. Groups that represent more than 90% of the global fleet say the measure is needed to tackle climate change. The tax would incentivize ship owners to invest in new technology, he said. The shipping sector is one of the big carbon emitters and is responsible for more than 2% of global emissions. If the industry was a country, it would be the 6th biggest polluter above Germany. UK is to speed up target to cut carbon emissions. The United Kingdom will cut carbon emissions by 78% by 2035 to fight climate change. Hitting the targets would require more electric cars, low carbon heating, renewable electricity, and for many, cutting down on meat and dairy. For the first time, climate law will be extended to cover international aviation and shipping. But Labour said the government had to match rhetoric with reality. It also urged Boris Johnson to treat the climate emergency as it is and show greater ambition. Thank you for watching. That was all for today. That was Reem Tamer. Goodbye.